Thank you for that great introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here speaking to this audience. I think that this conference is tremendously valuable. There's so many problems out there related to science integrity. It's great to be, getting these ideas out there and discussing countermeasures to all these problems. Also like to thank Boris for that great presentation. I love PubPeer, by the way. I think it's such a tremendous resource. I use it all the time. It's great to hear about, the behind the scenes stuff there. All right, so the topic of my talk is understanding the provenance of visual disinformation targeting science. This talk is going to be a little bit different from some of the other talks that have been given at this conference. I'm not going to be talking specifically about scientific publications. I'm going to be talking about the messaging surrounding science these days as it unfolds on the internet. Now, the internet is a messy place, as we all know. And we're seeing a lot of public health counter messaging from an unlikely source. And that, of course, being image and video-based memes that circulate on social media. This is interesting in some sense because culturally, the way we interact is changing quite drastically, right? Communication, in some sense, is very visual on the internet, right? Which is quite different than how we communicate, in the real world. And this is happening for a number of reasons, right? Social media makes it very efficient to pass images and videos. We can convey a lot of information, right, using a visual medium, which is quite interesting, right, and fun in many cases, but can also be misused. So one particular community that is misusing memes, of course, the anti-vaccination folks. That movement is not new, right? But they have largely moved their operations to the internet, and they're quite aggressively pushing a message, which right now is especially dangerous, right? As we try to get the world vaccinated against COVID-19. So traditionally, their memes have looked like this one on the right here, right? Picture of, a disease like measles, right? Which, can be prevented using a vaccine, a very safe and effective vaccine. That basically everybody gets, right? And the idea here is you can try to undermine the idea of that vaccine by saying, well, it may help you with, the disease it's billed to prevent, but look what it's going to do in the future, right? It's going to leave you with this terrible chronic illness, right? That's the conspiracy theory that sort of lies, behind the messaging, right, of the anti-vax community, right? There's a lot of frustration about, right, chronic conditions these days. But using ascientific analyses and coming up basically with fiction is not helping the situation. So we've had this for a long time. Now we're seeing very aggressive campaigns targeting the COVID-19 vaccines. And where this gets quite insidious, right? A lot of this begins as a joke, right? We can look at this meme in the middle panel here, right? We've got these two cute babies with photoshopped eyes, right? And the joke here, right? When they're about to give you the coronavirus vaccine, right? Like, of course, babies, young children, they hate, getting a shot, right? It's painful, it's unpleasant. And this meme is making light of that. And it doesn't really have an explicit anti-vaccination message, right? But you could imagine, right, somebody sharing this, not thinking too much about it, perhaps seeing other memes, right, that are related. They start sharing, those as well. And there's a network effect. And perhaps eventually this meme reaches somebody who wants to dig a little bit further, I am a little bit concerned about, the newness of this coronavirus vaccine. Maybe there's more to this. Maybe there's something I should be concerned about. And that may lead you to memes like this panel on the left here. This is a common genre that's been popular for a number of years called Hide the Pain Herald. You can put any text into these stock images, right, and build up a joke. Here, this is directly criticizing the effectiveness of the coronavirus vaccines, linking it to the effectiveness, the perceived effectiveness of flu vaccines, right? And now you can imagine, right, digging even further and getting more and more explicit messaging. And now, right, you're within this community, and the meme was sort of your gateway to it. So that's a big problem. And that's the kind of thing we want to, number one, be aware of. It'd be nice to understand when these campaigns are unfolding, when we're seeing a lot of this content, trying to identify related content, right? Building up these meme genres, and then perhaps interpreting these messages to understand, is the meme a joke or is it really something that's a threat to public health? And that's not easy, right? Especially given the vast scale of the internet. So what I want to do next is dive into a particular case to talk about how you put these pieces together. And then we're going to talk about some computational capabilities that my lab has been developing to try to tackle this problem at scale. So mimetic warfare, yes, that's kind of how I like to describe this, right? And of course, it's not related to just science, right? They're broader, right, discussions in politics, and many other topics, right, where memes are being used to spread disinformation. So one interesting case, back in the early days of the pandemic, I think we all remember a lot of folks talking about bat soup, right? There was this rumor spreading on the internet that the initial contact that humanity had with the coronavirus was somebody in Wuhan, China, sat down to dinner and they ate a steaming bowl of bat soup. Delicious. This wasn't really like a niche sort of thing, right? That was just on one particular internet forum. It was all over the internet, and people in real life were talking about this quite a bit, right? And it eventually made it to the mainstream news. And we're still in some sense talking about this today. Many people still believe that this is true. So back last March, I was hearing this and I was a bit skeptical, right? I was like, bat soup, really? Like, I've traveled through China. I've eaten lots of delicious things in China. No one ever mentioned bat soup. I never saw that on a menu. I've never heard my Chinese friends or colleagues talk about bat soup, right? It seemed a little bit suspicious. And then I started to see memes like these. And some of these memes had similarities to other memes I had already been watching. For instance, this middle panel, right? The bat in the bowl, this cartoon. If you look closely at the face of this bat, it may look very familiar. This is actually a Pepe the Frog meme, right? Pepe's been reworked into this bat-like figure. And of course, Pepe the Frog is a common figure in memes from the far right in the United States. And there was something else that was a little bit insidious, right, about this story about bat soup, right? It seemed to have an anti-Asian sentiment behind it, right? In that, in Asia, people eat disgusting things, right? Things that are offensive from a Western perspective, and that's bad. And look what they did. They brought this virus into the world. I think that idea is particularly salient with respect to, right, the events that unfolded, the very unfortunate events last week, right, in Atlanta with the shooting, and many other attacks against, right, Asians, not just in the United States, but around the world, basically piggybacking on this idea that the virus emerged in China, and perhaps it could have been preventable, right, if someone didn't eat something that they shouldn't have been eating. And then we have, lots of these different memes, right? We've got this Batman meme here, right? Directly poking fun at this idea that someone is eating bat soup in China. So where do we even begin with this, right? Again, there are some clues, right, that this is coming from a political perspective, right? But perhaps there's some truth to the story. Maybe there's some kernel of truth. And in fact, with a lot of myths, we often do find some basis in something that is true. So let's try to piece this together, right? Where did this come from? Well, very early on in the pandemic as well, there was some real science going on, right? Scientists wanted to understand where the virus came from. It had some similarity, right, to SARS, right, which was a respiratory illness where there was an outbreak in the early 2000s coming out of China again. There was a lot of genetic work, right, that had already been done to catalog, right, different related viruses like MERS, which was a later disease which emerged. And then also in terms of diseases that affect humans, right, there are 4 coronaviruses that cause the common cold, right? So those were natural things to take a look at in terms of matching the nucleotides, right, in this new disease, which was later dubbed SARS-CoV-2, right, in terms of the virus that causes COVID-19. And then there were animal sources, right? We know that a number of animals also harbor coronaviruses. And one that had already been fingered in the original SARS case was the bat, right? So we already had, again, these catalogs of this genetic material. So we pulled those out of the archives. We matched the new sequencing that had been done on the new virus. And lo and behold, the bat was indeed the closest match, right? 96% similarity. This is a panel from a paper that appeared in eLife in March of 2020. This is perfectly legitimate scientific work that appeared in a good open access journal. And so what's interesting here is that this was open access, right? The entire internet could access this paper and others looking at this same type of forensic analysis to understand where the virus came from and how it entered the human population. So the idea of the bat as being the prime mover here was out there very early on in the pandemic. So, okay, there is some justification for talking about bats at the very least. Also in the news very early on in the pandemic was this market, right, which was in Wuhan, the Huanan seafood wholesale market. We heard a whole lot about this. This was supposedly ground zero for the pandemic. The earliest cases that were confirmed, we were told, were people who worked at this market, which sold, fresh meat, fresh seafood, lots of other foodstuffs. And what you got then all of a sudden was a lot of scrutiny about how food is sold in China. And we heard a lot, especially in the mainstream news, about the sanitary conditions of such markets, that they were somehow not up to the standards of Western supermarkets. Then we started to hear that markets like this sell all sorts of exotic meat, that in China, there's an insatiable appetite for exotic fare, some of that related to traditional Chinese medicine, all of these different things. So again, I was reading these stories and thinking, boy, is that true? Again, traveled in China, been to a lot of markets just like this one. And they felt more like, a farmer's market here in the United States or in Europe, more than some sort of shop of curiosities. Now, again, you do see some interesting things. That's true of any market, in the world. But don't recall ever seeing any bats at these places, right? But the story was continuing, right? This had to be the source. This was the smoking gun, because the Chinese are purchasing such exotic meats. Somebody probably bought a bat at this market, and boom, now we have the link. But this sort of unraveled over time when you start to look at additional investigations that have been conducted around the initial outbreak. Now we know that there were confirmed cases in China before these cases were reported, going back earlier than early December of 2019. Even within the United States now, there have been some forensic investigations on tissue samples of people who died of respiratory illness in December, right around the same time this was happening. And they were found to have been infected by COVID-19. So that means, right, the virus was probably circulating for quite a bit longer than as was initially thought when this market was under scrutiny. Also reported, ABC News uncovered evidence of a classified intelligence briefing that had been circulating within the United States in November of 2019, describing a new respiratory illness that had been spreading throughout China, possible national security concern there. Again, that's sort of, reporting on a classified piece of material. I don't know if that's truly the case, but it seemed, to have some legs, right? And again, if you put all those pieces together, it seems like this market was probably not ground zero. And in fact, the World Health Organization was back there again just recently trying to figure out what happened in China early on in the pandemic, but has not released any other information about this being a particular, source of the outbreak. Perhaps there was some earlier cases that emerged from here, but it's very, very muddled. Given the vast complexity, right, of this situation, and serendipity, right? There's so many different ways the virus could have crossed over into the human population. It's hard to pinpoint one specific thing, right? But this fit nicely into the story of bat soup, because got a market that's selling food, could be selling some exotic animals, probably a bat, right? Boom. So it continued on. The tabloid news loved this story, right? Very sensational, very, very good for drawing viewership. Tucker Carlson, a host on the Fox News channel, ran a segment in March of last year on this market and so-called wet markets in general in China, alleging that these markets are primarily serving the purpose of selling exotic meat and seafood. And it was shocking to him that any of them were still open, that the Chinese government would allow this to continue on. And he then specifically makes the allegation that bats are available at these markets in China for the purposes of food, right? Here we see some screenshots from this segment. Here we do see a bowl of what appears to be bat soup, this grinning bat getting scooped up with a spoon. Again, delicious looking food here. Now, what's interesting about this segment, Tucker actually cites some sources for this information, right? That's pretty remarkable. He credits the Daily Mail, an English tabloid, as breaking this story and providing him with this photographic evidence. That's interesting. The Daily Mail, not the world's most reliable source of information. Again, mainly running sensational stories, some of which are fictional. And what's more extraordinary about this too, both the Daily Mail and the piece they ran in their print publication, and also Fox News here, have provided a source for this photographic evidence, right, of bat soup. And that is this Twitter user, Hong Kong 3333333. All right, so now we can do some investigation of our own, right? We can actually go to Twitter and try to figure out, what is this account? Why would this specific account be tweeting out photos of bat soup? Where perhaps did they get their photographic evidence for this case? And then also try to find related images. We can use some new technology that's out there to do image search and find this out. So we have our alleged Chinese delicacy, this bat soup, and we have a Twitter source. Let's go check this out. So first, this came from a now banned account on Twitter. And it was banned because the account basically was just tweeting out propaganda that was very pro-Hong Kong democracy, very anti-Chinese, Communist Party of China. Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, aren't they on the good side here of the fight? Well, maybe, but that doesn't give them license to simply make things up, right? So where this photo emerged, it was in a tweet that was posted by this account that was basically alleging that bat soup was very common in China and that the Communist Party was trying to cover this up. And now that, it became a problem with the pandemic that somebody did get sick by eating bat soup. Again, questionable source of information. Again, much of the other information that this account was tweeting out was false, and again is now banned. You can't even get this content anymore. But we could still do a reverse image search. This is a really handy tool that's built into Google image search. You can upload an image, which is what I did. I took a screenshot of the Fox News segment, and I put it into Google image search. You can also give it a URL of an image, and it will find related images. It will mostly find duplicate or near duplicate images, but it will also do an okay job in some cases of finding images that are stylistically similar, to the one that you provided. So when I did this with the image that Fox and the Daily Mail ran, I turned up a whole bunch of links about Palau, which is a small island in the Pacific, and somebody named Wang Mengyun. Okay, so those are two additional pieces of information that we can dig into. And I can see that my results were actually pretty decent for this search. I do see bowls of bat soup here, a bunch of different bowls of bat soup, not just the original one. I see somebody who is of Asian descent here eating bat soup. And again, it's not perfect. I also see this whimsical photo of a pudding cup with bat wings, which is not relevant to our case at hand. All right, so number one, who is this person, Wang Bengyun? It turns out that she is a popular travel vlogger in China. She goes around the world visiting beautiful and exotic places, and she often samples the local fare. So it turns out she took a trip to the small island nation of Palau in 2016, and she apparently did eat a bowl of bat soup. Yes, this does exist as a dish in Palau. It's served up to tourists as a novelty. It's some sort of traditional dish that was prepared on the island years ago and still persists as this novelty dish. What is okay here, though, in terms of public health, the bats are raised for food. These are bats raised in captivity, and they're fruit bats, and they're not known to harbor any dangerous viruses. So if you search the internet for bat soup, basically what you end up finding a whole bunch of tourist photos from people who went to Palau and ate this dish. Now, what happened on the internet, somebody, some sort of internet troll, discovered these photos and repurposed them. Changed the labels, alleged that this scene here that we're seeing here, here's the vlogger. She's actually in China eating this bat soup, and clearly she is Chinese, so the pieces fit. This did not happen right when she was on vacation shooting this segment. Now, she found out about it because this was explosively popular on the internet because it was helping to feed this rumor that the coronavirus emerged in bat soup. And she basically said, no, like, this is from a segment I did. This has nothing to do with food in China, right? This is the real story. But given the logic of the internet and conspiracy theories, easily dismissed, right? We can't believe this, right? It's like, I'm only going to believe what I see with my own eyes, and it's this photographic evidence. Palau is an interesting place as well. It turns out, while it's very popular with Chinese tourists due to its proximity to Asia, it maintains a much closer relationship to the United States. They use the US dollar in Palau. The United States provides its social services and also provides for its defense. So it turns out that the bat soup was with us all along, not the Chinese. Very interesting. Okay, so interesting case, but it took me a while to put all of that stuff together, right? To do those searches, to pull all of that content. And there was a lot more too that went into the research I did around it, more than what I'm showing you here. So there are some limitations to doing this by hand. Reverse image search works, but it only works well really for duplicate and near duplicate images. If there were very small regions of those images that I would be interested in and trying to find other related images just to those patches in the image, it wouldn't really work well at all. And that's going to be really important when we think about memes. There's also a staggering number of memes and source images out there on the internet, right? Look at just some of these numbers here. Every minute, over 200,000 images are uploaded just to Facebook. That's one platform. Every day, you've got 500 million people using Instagram, over 2 billion users watching or posting to YouTube. And every year, you're basically on the order of hundreds of billions of photos, right? Just in the social media ecosystem. Those are big, big numbers, right? When we think about data processing. So wouldn't it be nice if we could build a system that could watch the meme landscape? Maybe we could do this with AI. We'd want something with real-time processing, with content flagging. That would be really useful. We can put some sort of badge on the content saying, this is probably disinformation, right? Or this is not true. It'd be nice to assess the meme landscape with respect to events and actors, right? Some sort of coherency with respect to what is unfolding in the news. Maybe we want to watch for specific content related to events like the pandemic. And again, the scale I just mentioned, right? This is the biggest challenge in doing something like this. Just the sheer amount of data is incredible. And then it would also be really nice, again, if we're thinking about memes, to match composite images to other composite and donor images, because this content is constantly remixed over and over and over again, right? Some elements are removed, some elements are added, right? You're getting all these different pieces put together like a mosaic. And that becomes very challenging when you're trying to do image-based matching. So for several years, my lab has been working on this problem, and we've developed an automatic image provenance analysis pipeline. That will help us find related images, trying to trace back the sources of this content and trying to make sense of it, right, in some coherent order for human analysts. This is work that originally started in my lab with two really awesome graduate students, Aparna Bharati, who is now an assistant professor at Lehigh University, and Joel Brogan, who is now a postdoc at Oak Ridge National Lab. And this is work that was done jointly with Daniel Moreira, who was a postdoc in my lab and is now research faculty at Notre Dame and is also an attendee at this very conference. Okay, so what are the pieces of a provenance analysis pipeline? What are we doing here? There are two different steps. The first step is an image filtering step where we have a query image, right? The image we're interested in. And we want to find all of the images related to it, given some large database that we maintain of content that we've scraped from the internet. And that could be a huge database, right? That could be millions or billions of images. And what we want to do is find, right, a much smaller subset of just the related images. And we're going to get those back in an unordered fashion. Then the second part of the process is what we call graph construction. We're going to take that unordered set of images and we're going to try to put them together in such a way where we can figure out the chain of edits that took place, right? And perhaps find, the root image, where did this begin? And then over time, try to trace the evolution of the content. A little bit more detail here. As I keep mentioning, right, the biggest challenge is the scale. It's just so much content. So that means we need to engineer algorithms that are very efficient. That means we can't just build a database which stores the original pixel data of the images. Instead, we store what are essentially compact representations of the images in the form of extracted features. So we use computer vision based techniques to try to distill these images down into their essence, right? Find an invariant, a very small representation that still is descriptive enough that we can say this is a unique image. And we do that across the entire database, and that gives us, right, a much more efficient way to store all of this information. And it also makes it much faster to search, right, because we're not computing over all of the original information. Then when we perform our filtering, right, when we have our query image, to improve the accuracy, we run multiple rounds. So we initially find some related images to the original query image, and then we take those images and we treat them as new queries. And then we can find images that are related to those. And that means we may be able to surface some transitive relationships across this content, right? So that gives us a bigger pool of images that are related. Then we move on to our graph construction. We again extract visual features to help us do this, right? To put these images in order. We use some information theoretic-based metrics to do the ordering. And then at the end of the day, we get this output graph, right, which should be human interpretable, which says, you know, this image came before this other image. And if we're really good, we may be able to identify the operations that took place in terms of this image had something spliced into it, right? Or this image had something removed from it. Different tools for media forensics can help us do that. Now, what's really good about our particular approach is that we're really trying to target small edits to these images, because we see that a lot in memes, right? A very small change to an image can drastically alter its interpretation. For instance, think about that meme I originally showed you at the beginning of this talk with the babies that had their eyes photoshopped. It's a fairly small change, right, relative to the entire image, but it was significant in terms of our interpretation of the joke. So it'd be really nice to identify, right, the change happened, right, in the eye region and try to infer something about the message based on that. Here you can see a complex composition in this meme here, right, and some of the objects that have been spliced into the host image, right, the background are very large, but others are very small, right, like the hummingbird. So we've designed an approach that's able to localize those small objects, extract features particularly from them, and then try to find, right, matches in the database, right, that match to the individual objects. That works reasonably well. Here's an example of the ranked list in terms of the quality of matches we got back from the image retrieval step using this approach. We can see this meme that was popular from a few years ago, a guy on a frozen lake. The sharks were added, right? The wakeboard was added. You can see here we've localized, the sharks. We're able to pull them out. We've also localized the man in this image and other related meme images, right? And have been able to make that match, that association. So in a quantitative sense, how well does this work? We were participants in the DARPA media forensics program and went through the various media forensics challenges over the years that were used as evaluations and run by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They created a benchmark data set for this specific task. And it was on the order of millions of images. So it wasn't very small, but still not to the billions of images we would want. We can see here, we do a really good job on image recall related to the image filtering step, finding the related images. We're getting back quite a bit of images that we want to get back for, a particular query. But we're still struggling when it comes to building the graphs, to making sense of the ordering of that content. That remains a very significant challenge. And that's reflected in this link overlap metric specifically, right? These numbers are much lower than the recall numbers. The NIST data I'll mention was created in the laboratory to generate ground truth. What about the real data? This is really fascinating. I think a lot of assumptions are made in terms of what manipulated image content looks like on the internet, from a researcher's perspective, but that doesn't always align with what people are really doing. So we did go to the internet, and it's a challenge because you need ground truth, right? If you're going to compute these numbers, where do you get that? So we struggled with this for a while until we discovered this fun subreddit, our Photoshop battles, where someone creates a meme image and then others, right, are encouraged to remix it in creative ways. And what's nice about Reddit, as they post their output to it, you get a timestamp, right? So that serves as a form of ground truth in terms of the ordering. And what we found here was similar to what we saw before with the NIST data. very good at identifying the relevant images, but really still struggling on ordering them, right? So this edge overlap metric, again, was very, very low. And in fact, much lower than what we had with the laboratory data. So a lot of work has to be done there. Okay, so what can we do then in the interim, right? Would it be nice if we could do something that's not as perhaps precise as the graph ordering, but still gives us a sense of coherency in the content, right? So we developed something that we called motif mining for memes. Basically, once we've identified related images, can we cluster them in a meaningful way to understand if we're looking at a new meme genre or not? So this is work that was led in my lab by a grad student, Bill Tyson. So what we did was take the image retrieval, or sorry, the image provenance pipeline, and we kept the retrieval piece, right? We do our provenance filtering to find related images, but we swapped out the graph construction step for this clustering step. So we added spectral clustering. And we evaluated this against some existing approaches. We're not the only people looking at memes out there. There is a community in the social media web space looking at this as well, especially looking for political content. And we gauged the quality of our clustering. So we chose a case study. We chose a political event which would hoover up a lot of different content. And I'll link this back to the scientific integrity stuff in a moment, because we did find some interesting stuff in this data set. That was the 2019 Indonesian national election. This is work that was undertaken under a US aid funded effort in election integrity. And it was jointly done with Tim Wenninger's lab at Notre Dame and his graduate student, Pam Thomas. And what we found, the existing approaches like Google reverse image search are really good at finding duplicate and near duplicate images, but struggle when you try to make more fine-grained distinctions. And so with our approach, we got more clusters that were smaller and of higher accuracy, which is really good. And we hand labeled a bunch of these images. We started out with well over 1 million images, and then created a subset of that to do this evaluation, which had over 44,000 images. Okay, so unusual findings in over 2 million images. That's a lot of content that we collected from this specific event. We found a lot of things that surprised us, right? It wasn't all just political disinformation. I mean, we found a whole lot of that, a lot of really toxic memes. This is not unique to the United States or Europe or other places. This is the entire world facing this problem. But we did find a variety of messaging. Not all of it was disinformation. We found, in fact, many memes created by the Indonesian government itself warning people about the veracity of the messaging surrounding this event. Now, coming back to science, I want to point out that advertising regularly piggybacks on significant events like elections, and the products being advertised are not always what they appear to be. For instance, this bogus medical supplement we found called Super Grow Up. It promises to increase the height of adults taking it. Yes, you can grow taller as an adult if you take this supplement. So the advertising tells us. But it only works under the age of 40. So I better take it soon if I want to get a little bit taller. The website, curiously, went offline in early 2020. So this was shortly after the election. I found these ads promoting the product, though, still on a Facebook page, which was live on the internet when I put this talk together. This is a product that can't possibly work. And there's a ton of this stuff out there on the internet. And it's not just, supplements like that. There's supplements for everything. And who else is selling bogus supplements, piggybacking on elections to get this message out? Our friend Alex Jones. I think a lot of people think of InfoWars as just a conspiracy site, right? This is something that's just promoting conspiracy theories, right? Clearly a political angle to it. It turns out that's not actually what's happening. InfoWars is really a web store that sells supplements. I'm guessing some of them are bogus, some of them may be real, I don't really know. But the point is, the conspiracy stuff is sensational. It gets you in the door of the store, and then Alex sells you, I don't know, this muscle builder stuff. And it's not just him, right? This is all over the internet. In fact, I see a lot of this in the influencer world, even in the sort of micro nano influencer world, people with a handful of followers, they're actually still trying to sell these people things, right? It's like they say something outrageous, and then, right, they pivot to the sales pitch for whatever they're trying to sell. Coronavirus, there's even a cheap cure for that. The Reverend Jim Baker, yes, Jim Baker resurfaced during the pandemic as a pitch man for his own coronavirus cure based on some sort of silver gel. He got in trouble again. He has a history, in fact, of getting into legal trouble. The Food and Drug Administration in the United States shut this down, right? This is clearly a product that does not work and could be dangerous if you take it. So again, if you reach enough people with your message, you may find some people who are willing to buy these products. And all of this, right, is just bad disinformation and something we should be aware of and something we should be watching. Okay, so wrapping up here, outstanding challenges. If we're going to try to, again, tackle this using artificial intelligence, because we can't do this by hand. Scalability, we got to scale these systems. The system I talked about, the one from my lab, works for on the order of millions of images, but we need to get to billions. We're not there yet. And there's significant constraints in terms of hardware availability, to make that happen. We've spent a lot of time talking to the big social media companies. Even they don't have the resources to be able to handle this. Yes, they're storing that many images, but they don't have the capabilities to process and analyze all those images right now. And that's only going to get worse as we get to video, right? Replacing still images. Because a video is really just a container for a collection of still image frames, right, in a sequence. So that's just amplifying the amount of information we need to process. The graph building part of the image provenance pipeline could be very, very valuable for analysts, but we're still not there yet in terms of the accuracy on these meme-based challenges. And then finally, usability for analysts. Can we build something, right, that is more or less plug and play for ordinary people, not just specialists in computer vision and AI, right? All of those are big factors we need to tackle going forward. All right, I'm happy to answer any questions folks may have.